it's clearly done by one person who has spent a lot of time researching into this, and the Facebook page is very informative. They do posts and they highlight what they mean and what they feel like, so I am keeping very close with that, because it's a medieval manuscript. They think it has things to do with astrology and medicine, all that jazz, but it seems to have a biblical reference to it, from what I could see from the discussions. But it's very interesting, just how this person's just going through each page of this manuscript and is trying to have an interpretation of what's going on. So yeah, the Voynich manuscript, Voynich manuscript, it's very interesting, and the images of it is quite weird as well, and I come across it a long time ago because people were painting it out to be this real mysterious manuscript, and actually seeing someone having a stab at it and coming out with some things that I'm thinking, yeah, I think that makes sense. Yeah, it's very exciting, and I thought I'd mention it because I don't think it's had the attention that it deserves, this person and their page. So yeah, worth to look at.
There was a celebration of Breton. Was it Bretons? And it kind of, you know, today I think it is some sort of celebration. And of course it had the map. So it had all of the west side of Britain and then down to France, you know, and so yeah, it reminded me really of our connections, you know.
Yeah.
And
yeah. Yeah, so it's little interesting pieces. I do like things like that, and
they had the Karnak stones, you know, showing the Karnak stones and things like that. So I think it's we forget about it really, you know, but really we are connected.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that it's just sort of that discussion.
The Karnak stones are amazing. I've been there.
Yeah.
Oh, have you?
Yeah.
I'd love to go. There's loads of places I'd love to go. There's a big long
list. One
of
them is definitely an altar stone.
Oh wow.
With drain lines for the blood.
Well, that sounds really interesting.
Sacrificial stone, and that's one of the stones that.
I'd love to go, because you go down to Cherbourg or La Rochelle, you know. So it's sort of going on the boat, but down, you know, a bit further than going over to Calais. So it must be lovely to arrive there, you know.
Yeah.
You know, sort
of. We were at Quiberon when we did that.
Oh, envious! I'd love to go. I'll get into the lecture now.
Quite a bit of time in Britain.
Oh, I forgot. It's only an hour, isn't
it? It's all right, Anne. We could go over a little bit. This one, I thought I'd bring the interpretation, because every time I've mentioned medieval concepts of children, the first thing people say to me, "Oh, it didn't exist. There was no concept." And I've obviously looked a lot into this. Someone who was in the same group as me had done a similar presentation, and it was really good, but she had taken a different discipline into what she wanted to look at. I focused on the archaeology, and I find the archaeology is more relatable to me, because some of the things there you can just imagine, just child's imagination and creativity, and it's just that type of history that I like looking at. And we are going to go through a few other different disciplines. It's almost going to be like a review of interpretation brought, and some primary sources, and of course material culture. But I just want to sort of prove to you, maybe sort of make a very good strong argument to you guys that there was a concept of childhood in the Middle Ages, but it wasn't the concept of childhood that we think of today. And I do think that's down to the time, and I do think it's down to culture, different traditions, but I think it's something that we need to sort of discuss, because it is a heavily debated topic in the medieval world. Medievalists seem to literally claw their own hair out discussing this, and there's been quite a few publications that have been really interesting. And one interesting historian to note is Barbara Hannawalt. She discusses it from, she takes a lot of disciplines into account, so she'll go down the literary discipline, she'll go down the archaeological discipline, she will draw upon lots of things, and I like that because I think it just gives us more evidence to complement each other, or maybe even contradict each other. And that's what archaeologists and historians do. They sort of collect the information and the evidence, and they try and see what that tells them. And you have historians like Philip Ayres, who started this conversation off in the first place. And he I think he's partly to blame for the reason why people seem to think there was no concept of childhood in the medieval period, but we'll go into him in a little bit more deeper discussion in a bit. But depending on what sources you look at, literary, archaeological, legal, religious, you're going to get to a different outcome each time. And I think that's why there's a need to have a perspective made from having different disciplines brought together, because they can all help each other with the evidence. And the one thing that you see in common with all the debates that we have going on here is that there is a concept of childhood, but what that concept is not conclusive. A lot of people seem to agree, the general consensus is that childhood was a time of teaching obligation and duty to the child, and what they can bring to the family economy as well. When you look at loads of different sources, especially when you go down the medical route, you start to realise that it's a grey area, childhood, and it seems like from the ages of 7 to 14 is definitely a very grey area. And there are many historians available that have discussed this. There's many archaeologists that have done excavations and have had an interpretation on this. And I think one thing that I found just from looking at a lot of academic articles that are about, a lot of them didn't really look at the archaeological interpretation of all this. They just looked at sources. Some looked at sources from the 16th to the 17th century of what people were told or what happened to them during the medieval period. And again, you've got that issue of looking back on time, and we have really want to find something from that period, especially if people are talking about this 200 years after the medieval period and have got an opinion on it. Just because they're people in history does not mean that they have a right to know what the medieval period was like, because they didn't live through it. But it is interesting to keep them in mind. And I think what I'm trying to say is that my hypothesis with all this is that medieval childhood, there was a concept, and having saying that there was no concept gives it a negative reputation for the period as well. And it shows them to have lack of empathy and to be very barbaric, no creativity. Seems like childhood is something that has come about in recent years, but children will always be children. It doesn't matter where they are, they will always find ways to let their imaginations run wild, and definitely the material culture available proves that. So I'll go to the first person that had a say on this. This is the more recent book that you could get, is translated from French by Robert Bolduc, and it was a very interesting book to read. Ayres does put a good argument forward. You could see that he's well researched and thought a lot. This was written in the 1960s as well, so I think Ayres just was that kickstart into this conversation, and if it wasn't for this conversation, I don't think other people would have more discussions like it and bring out more evidence. So we have to take that in account as well. And he had the interests of everyday perspectives, and children were one of them, and he wanted to see what the perspectives were in terms of childhood in the medieval period. And he was fueled by many debates in the past and in his time period that pushed him to create this book, and he decided to piece together bits of evidence that would prove that there was no concept of medieval childhood. And I think, although it was a good argument, I feel like it was almost like he had the assumption, he had that belief that, because I know when you go to test something out, you've got to have that, for example, my dissertation, I've said I'm looking for trade in Wales, and I think it's going to show that it's going to be of a very diverse, rich trading culture. But I'm open to being proved wrong as well based on my evidence, and you have to be critical. And I think he just went in there with the assumption that there was no concept and only picked up the evidence that fitted his argument, which is not a very good analysation, I think, of the time period. But he came to the final conclusion that the medieval periods had no concept. He said it was just children were just babies, and then straight after that they were just sort of made to do a lot more and help and work, etc. And Barbara Hannah-Walt really comes down hard on Erez. She really rips his argument to shreds, and one of these reasons that she gave was because he's using recounts of being a child from later works that was done in the 16th and 17th century, and she said that people and their memories could be a lot different. His research would have been a lot better if he just looked at the evidence from the period. And you definitely see with a lot of illuminated manuscripts, even if you weren't using archaeology as bits of your evidence, if you're just looking at the illuminated manuscripts, that's really enough that you can look at to show that there was a concept of childhood, and that they did have play, and that it wasn't all doom and gloom as he made out. And I will be showing a few of the illuminated manuscripts of some children playing as well. And he based his methodologies just in the wrong way. I think it's still a great piece of work, and he did bring some valid arguments, but on a whole, I don't think he was able to provide a solid argument for it, which is all that I could criticise with him, really. I sound quite mean to him, but I tried to be nice to him. I just really didn't like his argument. And I think he was using different disciplines to what most medievalists after his time have used. And that affected really his concluding argument. And he used a lot of literary disciplines as well. And the thing is, with children, they could be learning to write, not able to write something down straight away. And the reason that we can get better evidence through archaeology is because the toys that are left behind and all the things of fun and games is something that's not written, but it just speaks volumes. And I think that is all I would say to him, is possibly have a little look further, but obviously he's not here now to actually sit that. But I do think it's a great piece of work, and I do recommend it if you do get to look at it. There is some online pages of it as well that you can just have a gander through. And I think he's just sort of given recounts of the period that has just helped the medieval period have that negative reputation that it has, and especially have confused a lot of historians as well in what assumptions are made of the period. If my button wants to work. Oh, there you go. So we're going to get to this next book, which apologies for the blurry picture, I've just realised. But this was my favourite interpretation and discussion about all this. This is a whole book that goes through different discussions of childhood through archaeology, and it's by David Hadley. And I do think he's really provided a good argument, because it's not only a book that he's written, and he's got a few chapters by other archaeologists like Carenza Lewis and historians as well. So I think he's really delved deep into having this interdisciplinary methodology in terms of the research that we have. And I find it a refreshing perspective on this whole this whole debate, because it doesn't give it that doom and gloom that once was. And he aims to use the archaeology that is found in excavations or by people that have just sort of found things in their garden. He's collected loads of different things throughout his time, and he's showing how this is put forward as an argument that there was a concept of childhood in the medieval period. And he does focus a lot on toys, for example, but he does focus on isotope levels in terms of diet, which we'll further talk about. But he also discusses how the best way to possibly see if there was a concept of childhood is sometimes burials. I know I took over from one of KARL's Roman classes a couple of weeks ago, and I was talking about how they looked at a burial of a girl in the Roman period who had a doll, and it brought a lot of discussions, especially what the doll was able to wear with the little gold rings. It just shows the status of the child as well, I think, but it also just shows, I think, how status can be equal to what type of childhood a child could have. I think that the lower the status, possibly, the less likely a child is able to have more time for, to play with expensive toys that are amazing. So you've got to see how creative they were getting as well. And so archaeology, Hadley has argued, is to be a little bit more conclusive into this argument, because there's tangible evidence that just we can interact with and have a relationship with. And in his book, he highlights how important this part of medieval childhood was, medieval childhood was important for their development in the future. And you can see that through toys, and he's even sort of pointed towards certain toys where they look like monks or knights, how it seems like to be whatever path that child is destined to take, it will be reflected for their toys. And you have Roberta Gilchrist, who puts forward a similar conclusion to Hadley as well, that the medieval period in its archaeology shows aspects of some sort of childhood, even if it's not the childhood that we know. Gilchrist has even gone further to highlight that to understand the concept that they had back in that period, we could even look at the diets of people, of remains of people, and use isotope analysis to say what that says about their idea of diet and children. And I think he's providing a very strong argument that's very modern, that's very refreshing, and it gives a valuable argument to the debate, and I think it's something to definitely look out for. And he's showing how archaeology can give us a much better, clearer, direct link to the past, and it's definitely got a place for this this discussion, because when I was looking at different discussions to have, I steered away from the archaeology one, really, because they were all to do with my dissertation. So I thought, oh, how can I pick something that wasn't put into the archaeology one and just turn it into archaeology? And I come across this book. It was a godsend, and it was really, really informative. So that's Medieval Childhood Archaeological Approaches by David Hadley. Definitely an interesting one. And it brought me towards these sort of figurines, and this is also put in an article on medievalist.net by Danielle Kubalski. She talked about Hadley's book. She was promoting it, and she gave a little article to it, and she used some of the artifacts that have been used. And she was saying that artifacts like this are very valuable to this discussion, because they show how a use of play is used for teaching children their future obligation and their future path. And one thing that she discussed about was this identity and the lack of it, and the lack of facial features. Like I've said, when there's figures that my mum has, I don't know if anyone's seen them, they're normally it's like a wood, someone's carved it and painted it. There's always like a woman in a white dress, and she's got no face. And my mum's got one of it seems like a mother, and then her older teenage daughter. I was a teenager at the time, and it looks like they're hugging, but they've got no facial features. And it always used to annoy me because I always wanted to draw faces on it, but yeah. I know with that sort of thing is to help people put themselves into that that sculpture, that ornament, and I think that's what we're getting here. That's what Kubalski's also sort of asking. She says that they're allowing children to picture themselves as that knight, and sort of go along and play in terms of thinking about their childhood subconsciously. So I think that's a very interesting argument because it shows that play is important to development, and we definitely still have that idea now. Sometimes you've got some kids, and I remember my sister used to have a book, and it was like one of those electronic books, and it would ask you to can you pick out this word, and it was done all through play, but it shows this important part of their development. And loads of things that are toys for kids that aim towards bringing a better development in loads of ways as well. So I think the medieval period did have a concept of childhood that was sort of similar to us, but just went off on a different tangent, in that they were thinking more of obligation and duty, and the development was for their future, and what they were going to do, rather than just sort of letting them develop to whoever they wanted to be. And I think it allowed children to engage with their future role in society and put themselves in their shoes and just feel like that was part of them. And I think that it was just sort of putting things like that into their identity as well. And I think it does speak a lot about culture of the medieval period, how what they're going to be and the name, you know, what they all do with that family name is important. So it's something that adults want to sort of try and get into their children's heads as early as possible. And I just want to get to these series of images here. So this is from a discussion about childhood in the medieval period. So the artifacts that you've got on the right, these are all little sort of playthings that they found. So one's like an ornament here, which was discussed possibly to be like a monk, etc. But you've got here the bottoms of what they thought of was like maybe someone with a high status, possibly a knight or anything like that. And they even discussed how there was horses as part of it as well, and part of that whole knightly duty. And there was also small little jugs, etc. And it made me think of when I was little, I used to have my little teacups and saucers to do tea parties as a child. So again, it's just bringing all those different aspects of our childhood and try and relate to this. And I think it definitely sort of opens your mind a bit to that there was a concept of childhood like we do, that play is important. So those are the artifacts. This was found in a friary in Germany. There's also here this image in the middle, which is also of interest. It's from a manuscript as well. Good old Carolingian handwriting on the top, which drove me insane for my essay quite recently. But as you can see here, is a father, and he's using like these sticks like a horse. And he's got his sons with them as well, and probably got the wife being like, stop mucking about, and that, you know, boys will be boys, they're just playing about and not listening, and the father's joined in as well. So again, it's showing that concept of childhood as well, and how the parents got involved. And also from the same place that they found all these artifacts at the friary, they found that they found puppets left behind, but this image here was just to show the puppet maker, etc., and how we would paint them and make them look nice. So they were just showing how, and I think you're going to make the link looking at this, how religion is getting close into this idea of childhood, and I do think it's an important part of childhood as well as religion, not so much of but what we think of like religious schools, etc., is sort of that religion was there to guide them and have salvation for them. So I think it makes sense to see that all this was at a friary, really, because it was possibly a place where they were getting involved in helping take care of children as well, because I do think it was a community effort bringing up children. It wasn't just the family as well, it was everyone in society. If they could help, they would. And I just think it's just showing people children what they're going to be in the future, or what they can be, and it just seems like horses and being a knight, or maybe sort of having tea parties, being like a housewife, really. It's just all reflected in their toys, and you definitely see that with some toys as well. Me sat there with my teacups and saucers, I would make all sorts of stuff. I feel sorry for my family for making them drink it as well. This was found in North Yorkshire, and they've discussed this to be possibly a girl, like a doll, and they said that this part here was maybe a handle. This here, but I tend to disagree, because of this here, it looks like there would have been like an arm, like her hands are on her hips, but it's obviously got this stick here, so maybe it would have been like for like some sort of puppet show or something, so they could hold it up and along. But this is in the British Library, and this is something that you can look at online. And it is quite interesting because you can see how she had this beautifully designed dress as well. Whether that's a reflection on the girl that would have owned this, it's got like a pattern. Oh, it's gone a little bit squiggly, but it's like a zigzag all the way up then, and it's the same on this side here, a little bit broken off, but it would have been a zigzag there. And this was found by accident, may I add. They didn't really mean to. You get it, there was a lot of pattern there, but it was found by accident, and I think it just blows my mind that things like this, artifacts that have been found, have not been considered at all. Because to me that just looks like they possibly would have been. It looks like a puppet of a high-class woman with a beautiful dress, with her hands on her hips. And the stick part was just for them to sort of allow her to talk and walk, etc. You know what children are like with their imagination, especially with puppets. So that's where I believe it to be. I don't think that was a handle at all. But it's very interesting. You can even make out the face, etc. So I thought it was a lovely find. And I do think the other ones were a lovely find as well. But Philip Perez, don't think so. This is a manuscript as well. This is said to be a French manuscript that is sort of reveals to us childhood, just sort of play as children, shall I say. And one thing I will say about the handwriting, just from a glance, if you're gonna look at handwriting, it seems to be not in cursive. It's got elongations of certain letters, but it seems to be just very printed, and to me that would suggest that it's a very earlier manuscript, because I couldn't find a date for this. Yeah?
Yes, can I make a comment?
Yeah?
I know I'm getting on a bit, because I didn't realise it was medieval, because the left-hand picture there shows somebody with a hoop.
Yeah.
And on his right hand, some sort of controlling device on the hoop. Now, in my young days, the actually hoop and wheel, the hook and wheel, was a popular toy for children. We go to the blacksmith and buy those, and go running down the street, rolling it.
I had one. Yeah.
Pete, you remember that?
Yes, I had one.
There are.
Had a hoop, and as you say, you would chase it down the street. Yeah.
I had a hula hoop.
I had a hula hoop as
well.
well.
You even take it shopping.
Yeah, well.
When you had to go to the shop, you take your hoop.
Yeah, I can imagine that being something that was glued to me as a child.
Yeah.
I used to play with conkers and things like that when I was a kid.
Yeah, I think play is really universal, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think they've discovered that, but of course, we were really we've really been into childhood since the awful Victorians, and you know, we've had a lot of psychologists, you know, sort of telling us how we should look after children and that. But you know, play actually is very universal, and you can identify, everyone, every age can identify with it.
Yeah, yeah.
A lot of those toys were for more affluent families.
Yeah.
The more affluent the family, the more likely you would have a realistic toy.
Yeah.
If you're from a very poor family, you more than likely had duties rather than. I mean, I had to clean out the chickens when I was 8. I would clean out the chickens and turn over some ground for the chickens. That was my job.
Yeah.
And things like that, you see.
I agree with that, Peter, as well. Especially with this manuscript as well. You're not going to get someone who is poor to commission a manuscript like this as well. No. So I do think that this is showing the same boy, by the way, from what I read. So you've obviously seen the hoop just sort of walking around town, and you can see the daily life of people in the background. And this
well
one here,
dressed with shoes on.
Yeah. Yeah, so he seems to be sort of flashing a lot of things off there in the town. One thing I thought was quite interesting was the next page as well. It seems like someone has gone through it as well with at a later period and have put Arabic numerals in, from what I could tell. But this is the same boy, and his bed's obviously by here. But what I could read from what I've read of this, this was his own like mini altar that he had in his bedroom, and so he was playing almost like a priest in his spare time. And I think you always sort of this led me to a lot of memory zaps, I think I call them, sort of when you're having flashbacks of your childhood. And it blew my mind, because I think how children play is possibly a reflection of what they're going to do in the future. I used to, a very weird child that I was, used to wear fake plastic glasses, which I could, why? But I was about, under the age of 10 when I was doing all this, and I'd have these big clipboards and I'd write all sorts on there, or be squiggles, and I'd ask my mum to sign these forms. And I also used to read a lot of horrible histories books and try and get, my one fascination was the pirates, so I used to get lots of books about the pirates, historical books, and I would trash and treasure loads of things, and I would write my own little book on it. And I was saying to my mate, I said, it's no different to what I do at uni, really. It's just sitting there, trash and treasure research and coming out with an argument on it. I said, so times hasn't really changed, and I think it clearly was something that I felt like it was natural for me to do, and it's something that I love doing. But in the time period, you start to see that duty and what children are doing are based on religious duty as well. I know a couple of weeks ago I talked about St. Teresa of Avila, and in her first chapter we have that idea of childhood and play as well. And she talks about how when she was a little girl, she would sort of bring bushes together to create like a house, and she would pretend to be a nun that was living in silence, and she'd pray all the time and meditate, and she went on to be that woman that done that. So I do think the concept of childhood in the medieval period, and possibly now, is especially more than, was based on their duty and what they're going to do and their obligation in future. But I think that sort of never really leaves children. I think just children now have they have more, instead of saying I'm going to be a monk or I'm going to be a knight, etc., you see more children coming out with things like, my sister said, oh, I'm going to be a princess, and I'd be like, oh, okay, right. It's nice to hear lots of children say what they're going to be when they're older is different to the medieval period, because it seems like they had their family's honour and their duty in mind, whereas children have a lot more freedom of creativity. And I think, like you said, play is universal, but I think back then, depending on your status, depended on how much luxury you would have in terms of toys and the times of play as well. But like St. Teresa of Avila, she talks about sort of just in her garden, and I used to do loads of things in the garden and build dens and pretend I was, you know, sometimes I pretend that I was like a mum, my friend was a dad, and if we couldn't think of anything else, someone would be the dog. It was just play like that, and it's nice to see these reflections, these sort of glimpses of childhood in certain sources like that. And I just like that, because he's got his whole altar set up in his room. He's really dedicated. He's even got the robes. And then we got this other illuminated manuscript. These are just showing here is children. So the first one, if he wants to let me annotate, there you go. So this is the first one. I thought at first it was possibly the dad, because he seems to be a lot more bigger, but it seems like he's catching butterflies. There's a butterfly there, and I've read that there's sort of more recent discussions on what butterflies mean in the medieval period, and they're thinking that it's maybe got some sort of religious connection, but it hasn't really been talked about that much. It would be quite interesting. But this illumination is a letter E with 3 people in it, and you've got one that's got like a stroller. I tried looking to see if there was any strollers that had been found in excavations or just found. Unfortunately not, but I think it would just be amazing to see. And they clearly seem to be 2 younger children, and we do definitely have strollers for babies now, and that they might have like annoying noisy things on them. My sister used to have one that just makes stupid like beeping noises whenever she wanted, or etc., and she'd hold on. And the other child there, I don't really know what he's got there, but it seems like he's got something on almost like a string or
spinning top.
Yes, that's a spinning top.
Yeah.
Thank you, Anne. It's been driving me crazy. I was thinking, what is that? But thank you, Anne. That's thank you so much.
I've never seen one.
Yeah, no, I was just really confused at it, but thank you, Anne. Thank you. And this brings us to Barbara Hannawalt, who firmly discusses that there was a concept of childhood, and she really goes hard on Erez. There was one article that I had read of hers, and all it was like about 3 pages, just sort of ripping his argument to shreds, and I was like, oh my days, this woman is really going hard here. And you do find that with some historians and academics, is that if they know the person, sometimes they criticise the work a little bit nicely, whereas if it's someone that they're not really that close to, they tend to just go hard for it. But she just was sort of discrediting him, not completely, but she just said that he was looking at this all wrong. He wasn't bringing in different disciplines, that this is important, she was saying, to understanding culture and what that means for children. And she was saying that obviously a lot of social status affected children's play. So she was saying that a lot of lower class children would have to just be creative with their outside and their imagination, and there wouldn't be much money for toys, and we've definitely discussed that. And I think really it's almost like looking at all these toys, to me, would just sort of, it did make me sort of feel like maybe this is maybe an elite way of looking at history and not looking into maybe children of a lower status. But part of the issue with that, because I really tried finding things that was showing children of a lower status, I was realizing that it was really hard to get to that point, because there was just very little written about it. So I think they possibly would have had duty heavily put on them more at an early age, with other children that could afford to develop and grow at a slow and steady pace was allowed to. I also sort of come to the conclusion with this that possibly the medieval period has got a grey area in terms of some of the things we're going to look at towards the end, is because maybe it did depend on social status or maybe that whole that general consensus of what the concept of childhood wasn't the same in every area and the same with every community. So maybe that's why there's a lot of question marks coming from there, because it was different based on different communities and cultures. But Hannah Walt is saying that culture is just important to understanding the concept of childhood in the medieval period. She's saying that we just need to sort of stop having this, negative picture of medieval concepts and sort of realise that children are children and they don't change, that every child, like we can sort of relate to some of the things that we've just seen then. It just shows that children, that creative imagination and that need for play and all these little games is something that have stuck with us. And I think what she tried to argue is that the concept of childhood is similar to today, but and she looked at the whole idea of creativity and playing games, but she also said that it was possibly a period that lacked so much emotive feelings into it like we do now. And she says that this positive view that she brings forward can sort of take scholars back to their own childhood, which is definitely something that has happened with us looking at some of these things. And she says that this has given her argument a strong sense of intimacy and allows us to have a better connection and understanding. And I think culture is a playing factor in all this, because from a glance it can look like there was no concept, but when you start to understand the culture and how things are working, you start to realize that different concepts are made from different communities. And then you've got sort of you've got Hugh Cunningham, who goes further to argue that the childhood was shadowed by obligation and duty in the future and what they can bring to the family economy. And so he was saying that the concept of childhood isn't all as rosy as Hannah Walt argues. He said that there was obligation that was put into it, but this fun and game sort of, as it got further along into their childhood, just become more about their own future. And that's, I think he was sort of referencing, definitely when you see these figurines making them look like these big strong knights, they've got to think of that in the back of their mind. From a legal perspective, it gets quite interesting, because medieval laws understood that children could make mistakes. They understood that children were still learning about how to be a good citizen in society. They understood the children just needed the guidance from other sectors. And this brought to Ruth Rosenson, that argued that in terms of the canon law, there was rights for children in the medieval period, and that was based on the fact that children could not adequately protect themselves. And so she related that the church stepped in and got involved with children and bringing them up at this point. And so she said that community is part of all this. And the church was seen as an important role for helping children get back onto the right path and have that religious piety for the future. But from a legal perspective, it seemed that it understood that if a child did something wrong, it was possibly a mistake, or they didn't know what they were doing. That they needed that guidance, because they were understood to be something that needed protection rather than having punishment. And I think it just shows a little bit more of an empathetic side to the medieval period, and shows that they do have empathy and they're not as barbaric and sort of forceful with a lot of things that they did. And again, they had just understanding of what children were like. Children are still learning in life and they're still learning their path. And so the church has stepped in to give them rights, really, and sort of acted like this responsibility was just not the families anymore. It was the community and the church. So we get to the church part here, and there's another illuminated manuscript of a little boy and his two parents handing him over to monks. And this is argued by Rebecca King Curlin. She's saying that a lot of families would hand over their children to monasteries and monks to look after them, to bring them up, because it would help them with their own religious piety and their own salvation. but it would also help with the parents in terms of acting like a way of a bridge for themselves to go to heaven, because they had given their child up to the church to possibly be a monk. And she said that this is showing how the church did have a say in all this, and how children have got to be involved in religion as early as possible, to ensure that they're on the right path. And that seems to be what it was like for a lot of families, definitely a lot of richer families, for example, like we see with that young boy there with his own altar. It seems like they were very set on making a big religious sort of devotion to God. And it's quite interesting because it shows that religious piety is a part of the development as well. And once they were able to hold their own, that was when they had a monastic duty. And this is something that Valerie Garver discusses as well, that this is part of a person's life, to take advantage for everything that they have in terms of gaining more religious worthiness for God. And I was quite interested because it's just showing a different aspect. The parents are handing their responsibility over to a group of people and putting their faith into them. However, there was a problem in terms of children, and this is discussed by Jerome Kroll, how this idea of children and what that meant to the church was really problematic and very taboo. In this image here, on the side is the medieval picture of original sin, so Adam and Eve, and it's even in Old English as well, which is what I love, because you can even see right next to the snake here, it says serpent, and I even got the words Eve here, and then Adam's just going off into the other side. But to the church, they felt like children were a reminder of how they were conceived, and they didn't really like that. They didn't really like that idea. They felt like it was very sinful, and the child was made from sin. And that was very problematic. It was just one of those questions that kept coming up in the church, and really they tried to avoid. It was especially, there was a lot of discussions that made the church uncomfortable. I think one of them as well, which it just seems like a very weird theological debate at the time, but I guess it was something that went through their mind, was about the Virgin Mary, and they viewed menstruation as very negative and very dirty, and something that a holy person wouldn't have. And then someone sort of brought up the discussion of well, did Mary have a period? And they were, you could just see that their minds just sort of went and they tried getting a way around it. So I think little discussions about menstruation, about sex, it was very uncomfortable for the church, and I think they tried to sort of ignore it or try and have arguments for it that sort of justified it. But for children, they decided to look past it and help set them off to a path that allowed them to be protected from evil, and allow that they were still pure and innocent, because they did feel like a child was pure and innocent. They were the great foundations of having someone to be a very pious person. But they were just a reminder of original sin, because we're all born with original sin, according to the Catholic Church, until you're baptized. So that was also a reminder for them, and they just also was a reminder of how they were conceived as well, and it just made them very uncomfortable. But they said that overall this was something to be looked over, because in terms of setting children off onto the right path, we needed to look up past that and see that salvation was the utmost priority. And then we get to the Hieronymus Maurus. He wrote the Universo, and this was a lovely manuscript to look at, a very colourful, vibrant one, especially with terms of some of the colours we used, blue. That would have been very expensive, so it just shows that it was a very expensive manuscript. It's been kept in a beautiful condition, and he is a monk, a Benedict monk, that is talking about childhood, And Valerie Garver jumps in to say that he just sort of shows that a person's early life is blurred. Two terms have come from this, not childhood, but infantia, which was used for infants from up to the age of 7. And then you've got puerita, which was for children aged 7 to 14. And that's what I'm saying, it's very grey when you get to the 7 to 14 bit, because it seems like more duty is given to children at that point because they can hold their own a little bit better. This monk was sort of discussing the importance of guidance of children to being able to develop into a successful citizen, a successful adult for their family, for the community as well. And it's showing how the church is the responsible sector in all of this as well. And then we get to the ages of man, and this was definitely something that was just scratched my head really, because this image here that I've got on the side, it goes round. So here you've got a coffin, and then you've got a woman with a baby, and then you've got a young child, and then you've got another sort of young child, almost like coming up into their teens, and they're doing a little bit more work. Then all of a sudden they're young knights, and then they're even more important here with the religious piety. Then they're getting a little bit old here, they're having children. It just shows the stages of life that's important. And then they're bedridden, they're sick, and that's their funeral, and that's when they're just gone. And it's very interesting because the stages of life are different depending on what sources you look at, but this was the most famous source that I could get to. But it was just this period here, so from the child to the teen was what I was interested in. And the teenager to the young child just did not have any difference, other than the fact that the young child just seemed to be, it looks like that they were dancing and playing, whereas the one above it, the teenager from the 7 to 14 ages, is what I was thinking. They seem to just sort of be working on a few of their duties, few of their errands as well. And I think it seems very blurred. You can't really tell the difference between them. You can just sort of look at what they're doing and tell that there's some difference. And I think this is, this is discussed by Roberta Gilchrist. She seems to think that this is something that's quite problematic because we can't really draw many conclusions from it. It doesn't really tell us much, but she does believe that this sort of goes along the same lines of the De Universo on how children look, but there's just a third step added to it, because a newborn baby seems to be a completely different concept to the other two as well. If my mouse wants to work. And then from a medical perspective, so here I've just got the images of, I have discussed this in a few, so you've got the person, and you've got all the humours as well, so the humours of the yellow bile and the blood and the phlegm and the black bile, all them there. And they sort of, this was based then on fire, air, water, earth, and cold, hot, wet, dry, those sort of characteristics, see whether someone was ill. They went further and started talking about the seasons as well, based on the humours, and they believed that spring was childhood, and that winter was decrepitude, and then you've got autumn, which was old age, and then summer, which was manhood. And it just shows how, again, it's that different concept that have been brought up here. But Gilchrist is talking about how children from younger than the age of 7, that's where childhood really was, because they were allowed to sort of develop in their own way and play however they wanted. But when they got to the age of 7, obligation and duty were put more onto them more heavily. And she's seen that this affected the humoral theory as well, how this needs of nurturing was all different. And Kroll definitely comes into this, Jerome Kroll. He said that children were affected in terms of the humoral theory, because their need for nurturing and guidance in terms of their health and their diet and what to be looked after is affected based on this, because it didn't go into much we didn't go much into what a child was. It just sort of showed that it just was very blurred, and I think that was just part of the issue of how children were looked after in terms of health and diet, etc. And then we get to this spot, which was my favourite spot really, is Warren Percy. Is a very infamous deserted medieval village in England, north of England, near Yorkshire, and Gilchrist discusses this. There's been a lot of discussions of this, but Roberta Gilchrist. I like Roberta Gilchrist because I don't know if you noticed, I've discussed her quite a few times, and they've all been not just on archaeology, but different perspectives as well in terms of literary. So I feel like she's really taken on this interdisciplinary approach to this. But she says that diet is not helpful either into getting a concept of what the medieval periods of medieval periods of childhood was. She's saying that we're looking at isotope analysis, and we can see that the remains found at Warren Percy, that there was poor diet. The weaning process seemed to be not great compared to now, and because of that children were losing on nutrition. But they had found that children that were being breastfed who were very young, they had good health, and so they realized that weaning was seen as not as an important stage as what we thought, and this affected the child's health. But it just showed that the concept of the medieval period of childhood is that the children, once they felt like they could hold their own, then they were just sort of almost left to their own devices. They didn't have as much nurturing because the parents have to go off and do their own obligation and duty as well. And it's definitely interesting to see that, because to me it just further throws a spanner into the works of this discussion, because no, there wasn't a concept of childhood in terms of diet. They believed that as soon as a child was able to eat other foods, then they were just able to sort of just leave to themselves and not wean them onto these foods. They were just seen to just be chucked onto that foods, and that was that. So I think they saw childhood was possibly, as soon as they could hold their own, it was something to get them started into learning how to live their life. But I think one thing that's interesting that Gilchrist does mention is that people didn't live as long as we do now, and so they had to learn quite quickly. They had to teach their kids quite quickly how to live, because they're not going to be there forever. And it was just important really on how to be part of the community, do your obligation and duty, and this affected diet as well, because people had their own obligation and duties rather than just sitting there trying to wean a child and sort of find better foods for them, especially because of how limited the food was there as well available to them, which was seen through isotope analysis. One thing that I thought was quite interesting was this book that I kindly had for Christmas off my best friend. Is just sort of medieval writings on secular women, and the historian that had written it, Patricia Skinner, she looked at all different sort of stages in a woman's life to sort of, it's based on women, but she's looking at stages of people's lives. So chapter 1, for example, was just birth and infancy, and then you get to chapter 2, which was girls and young women. So I was having a look at them, and you definitely see how that after infancy, obligation and duty seems to be a little bit more ingrained to the to young girls, and the earlier the better. And that's what you could see here. Definitely sort of a contract placing a girl in service in 1090, and this is just the young girls bit. A peasant girl at work in France in the mid 12th century. So these are just sort of write-ups of medieval sources that talk about experiences. And this peasant girl at work, it just sort of talks about, again, this monastery, this Cistercian monastery, how she was part of a poor family, and she was going there for high peace and high hope, and to be elevated up to God. So again, this obligation and duty is put through in terms of monastic duty. But when you look at infancy, you can definitely see a difference. But I do think that there seemed to be in the medieval period more focus on the younger stages than the older stages for play development. Whereas after the age of 7, that's when children had to sort of step up a bit. And I think these are the sort of 4 little conclusions that I have today, that the concept of childhood is different today. And we need to sort of stop thinking of our concept of childhood to look at the medieval period. I think we're allowed to sort of feel connection with it in terms of the toys, but we need to realise that there's a lot of factors culturally that affects how children were seen. And I definitely think that the grey area from the ages of 7 to 14 is because more obligation and duty were put on children compared to infancy. So childhood really was a lot earlier than what we thought. And there is still empathy, there was still emotive sort of responses to things. They understood that children made mistakes and they needed to be taught to set on the right path. Because they were vulnerable, they needed the guidance from the church, from the community around them, from their family, to make their family name proud, to make their parents proud, and to make the community proud as well. I think that there was a general consensus from looking at all this that children are based on obligation and duty, and that is seen through their play and their toys, because they're using their toys as for guidance and allowing them to sort of work on what they felt like they were going to be in the future. And then I get to Corinne Lewis, who had put in the final chapter of Hadley's book that there is a need for an interdisciplinary approach, and she definitely goes along with David Austin, who discusses the issues in archaeology, how there needs to be this interdisciplinary approach, just to bring together all the different arguments and evidence to create a conclusive argument, really. And ultimately it's still a heavily debated topic with no conclusive evidence, but I personally think that the medieval period, from up to the age of 7, you were seen to be nurtured, have the toys if you could, have a lot of play, but from 7 to 14, that's when it got really fast for a lot of these children, because they started to see that they were able to hold their own, and so they had to help with obligation around them. So I think the concept of medieval childhood was seen to just guide children and put them on their future paths. And that's what the toys were for, to help them engage with their future. So thank you everyone for listening. Is there any questions? So I'm going to ask, is there any questions, Anne? Or anything to add?
I mean, it's always very, very interesting, childhood, you know, seen from all different eras, because I always remember reading a book saying that in Rome, you know, Rome children belonged to their parents. They were like what's what they called, you know, property. They were just like property, and they weren't treated as really different, you know, like having needs or anything, you know. But I would query that as well, because I mean, you do see pictures of children playing in the Roman period, you know. You know, so yeah, it is a very interesting topic. I think it probably hasn't really been looked at since, you know, before now, because of our interest in you know, in childhood and education. I mean, it's probably education. Show me a child before they're 7. Give me a child until they're 7, and I'll show you the man. That was Francis Loyola said that.
Yeah.
And he was the one who, well, he thought the age of reason was 7, you know. That was the whole thing of the religious aspect. They said, you know, if you educated a child till they were 7 and told them that, you know, all they needed to know, then that's all they needed. That was the point at which they became like an age of reason, you know. which is really far too young.
Yeah.
You know,
I had no reason at that age. I don't think I have any reason now.
I think we are much kinder to children now, but I think we're really getting that it's going out of control now. It's getting a bit weird now.
Well, funny that you say that. My sister was misbehaving the other day, and my mum asked her to come down the stairs, and she said, "Section 21 of the Children's Charter, I have the right to privacy, and so I can stay upstairs without you bothering them."
Oh yeah,
like,
yeah.
we went back to the medieval period to start talking about the Children's Charter.
Is your mum a social worker?
No, my mum's done teaching assisting, and
That's what
she's
should be done.
Yeah, but it's my sister just sort of throwing things out, all sorts of things. Honestly, the things that she comes out with, my sister,
it's getting really difficult now.
Yeah, if things don't go her way, she's calling Childline. My mum goes, "Okay, I'll call them for you." Call her bluff, but yeah, no, it's definitely different to see how a child is. Pardon?
What did you say? Put them
out to work.
Put them out to work.
Yes.
You know,
Children, when back then, you see, children by the age of 14, they had to be working.
Yeah, I used to have a little
Unless
job.
we were a very affluent family.
Yeah, no, I honestly, I don't think I could trust my two sisters to do work, in all fairness to them.
If you look at, you know, even don't have to go to medieval time, look at from Peter's time and Bill's time, and even Pat's American shit.
Hang on, you're not medieval.
But you know, my mum used to say, well, I didn't have any fancy toys, you just had to play with the pots and pans and a spoon.
Made your own toys.
Yeah.
And then in the soil, you know, dig tunnels.
Yeah, I used to dig and mess around with a lake. We've got like a lake and brook near where I live,
water,
and
you know,
I come home with fishes in a tub. Oh yeah, my sisters, I think their generation, even to mine really, because I wasn't brought up with the technology that they have. They've got phones, TVs, and all these different PlayStation things. I don't even know what's going on. I just think, oh Christ, it's different, definitely different. And I do think children now are a little bit more lazy. They're more happy to stay inside and not go out and play. But I know there's some children that still do that, but my sister, I have not seen her leave her room for days now. So
it's sad when you keep kids in.
We try and get them out, Peter. My one sister, she goes out, but this other one, she's having none of it, and so we just leave her to it. We say, "Do you want to come?" We went out for a little walk around Cosmeston the other day. "No, I don't want to go. I hate you all." And she's going through that stage of,
how old is she?
Like a teenage. Oh, she's.
Has she got jobs to
14 this year. Yeah, my mum makes her do
Oh.
tidy around the house, and we do help her out. But when she does that, she runs up into her room, and that's that. But we've got no complaints in terms of homework, and that's just very antisocial, I think. But I feel like I was like that because I was happy to just go off and read a book somewhere. That was me. Back to the conversation out with this rather than my childhood. Bill, anything that you'd like?
Think of the monks. They were given.
Go on, Peter.
The monks were teachers, and they would teach literacy and numeracy. Yeah,
because you see that there's a lot of, in terms of manuscript, you see sometimes there's manuscripts left behind where children are practicing their handwriting and their letters. Yeah, that seemed to be what they were focusing on more. Anything else you'd like to add, Peter, as well?
No, I've done my bit now.
No, thank you. Richard?
Not really interesting. It's not really a subject you tend to think about, you know.
No. Yeah, it's definitely interesting one to sort of look into.
Probably not that much sort of written about it, you know.
Yeah, it'd be nice to see more things, sort of more interpretations written.
I imagine the difference between, you know, the Paul, children of the Paul, and the children of the hypocrisy or whatever, you know. Being totally different. Yeah. Totally different upbringing.
Yeah, and I think that's what I would sort of like to see, if there was anyone that sort of, because I haven't come across it at all yet, but if anyone is sort of I'm still looking for, seeing to see if there's any interpretation from lower class children, because I feel like that's just a gap really in the history. History and archaeology is all about getting perspectives of every experience in life, and I feel like that's just the gap there, is the lower class children of the medieval period.
They might not have even survived. They might have died
Yeah.
in infancy or young, you know. But
well, yeah, you definitely see that at Warren Percy, because there was a lot of children remains, and it was based down to the weaning process not being done properly, and not right amount of food, etc. So yeah, you definitely see it in sort of that sort of sense, but nothing sort of directly written or artifacts, for example.
the nursery rhymes and the songs and all that. Oh yeah, sorry. There's Bill.
No, go on, Bill. Oh.
Am I the last one?
Yeah, go on. Yeah, Bill and then Pat.
Oh, sorry. What was next?
Go on, Bill.
I can understand some of these writers saying that there's no concept of childhood in the medieval period, particularly when applied to the lower social classes, the serfs, etc., because they would be living under a life of grinding poverty and trying to survive. So when they had children, yes, they would have to allow them to be children and mature as children, play a little, until they got to the age where they were considered to be old enough to contribute, go out in the fields and do this and that, everything else, you know.
Yeah.
And I think the parents would have not thought about any future different from that. They would have to stay as children, young adults, throughout their life with them to help.
Yeah.
The parents died, actually. I'm sure that's the case with the lower classes. Obviously, when it comes to the hierarchy, yes, those children then will have a future, and they will be planned to actually carry on the family name and do something, etc. But I think some of these writers just have avoided that, actually, the grinding poverty, not realized that was a major factor in analyzing the way children were brought up, you know. I feel sorry for the young children. They didn't have a childhood.
Yeah.
They were working all the time. I mean, that's been done in the era of coal, you know. You had 6-year-olds going down in the mines in the 1800s, etc. So
yeah.
That's always the case, you know, because life has been bloody tough, you know, for the vast majority of people through the centuries, you know.
Yeah,
So,
I think I would go down the same route to say that you could put that there was no concept to the lower classes rather than the higher classes, because I do feel like this discussion has been very elitist as well.
Yes, yeah. I can understand that the hierarchy actually handing the children over to the church for education, etc. At the actually low classes, they couldn't possibly afford to do that. They needed those children to help them survive, basically, you know. So yes, it's a split between the haves, if you like, and the have-nots. What's changed over the centuries? Very little when it comes to that.
I think also with that the French peasant girl sort of being handed over to a monastery. Let me just check. Yeah, from what I could tell from this was that the reason why she was handed over wasn't because the parents necessarily wanted her to. They felt like it was just going to give her a better life that they could give her as well. So there could be a lot of belief of that, and you definitely see things like that. Obviously, when you get to the workhouses, etc., as well, people feeling like they're doing the best for their children because they felt like they couldn't support them. I do think that there definitely needs to be more of a discussion about that, because I do feel like that is the gap, really. The fact that it's all elitist. We should do a part 2 once if I find anything with lower classes. We should do a part 2 on this. I'm going to make this my little mini dissertation on the side.
The majority were lower class.
Oh yeah,
exactly.
Yeah,
absolutely, yeah. But it's wonderful, you know, that I know now. I've played with a medieval toy, the hook and wheel. Wonderful.
Yeah.
By the Victorian times, didn't they used to have, like, one would go into the military, one would go to the church, one would go.
Yeah.
They used to have like you say, a hierarchy in the family of who would go into the church, who would go as to be a soldier, a teacher, you know. So probably more than one soldier, because they had loads of children, didn't they?
Yeah, Yeah. Yeah, I think that's good. Pat, anything that you'd like to ask or add?
Oh, I just think the little dolls, the little figurines and all were quite touching, you know.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
just
They're lovely.
them, you know.
Yeah, I felt like they were very touching, and I also thought of you know, the child, what sort of things that he would play with, and or she, because I used to play with those little toy soldiers. They have Sylvanian families, and I'd like to have the soldiers burst through the door, and I'd have like my little mouse be like, no. So it's little toys and games like that I'd always think of whenever I looked at artifacts like that, was what I would have done as a child.
You know, when you think about it, you know, people write books about what's there, don't they? I mean, they're going to find a source of information, and yeah, it is up to people to do more research, you know. And do more
and I think if anyone's watching,
nice, you know, nice to hear about all their games and their toys and things. It does give you more of a feeling that they were humane, you know.
Yeah, I think one thing to say, that if anyone's watching this when this gets uploaded, in the world, if you're a person that wants to go into a degree, this could possibly be a great way for a dissertation, because there's that gap in the knowledge. That gap. I've been on that sort of buzz really at the moment, trying to find gaps in everything. So yeah, we found one today, guys, all collectively. So thank you so much, and thank you for this evening. I'll see you next week. I'll see some of you tomorrow. Not Bill. We'll miss you.
Sorry.
It's all right. Take care, everyone.
Okay,
Thanks, Jess.
Yeah.
Bye. Bye.
Bye. Bye, everybody.
Bye
Bye.
then.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay. Thanks for the notes.
It's okay, and more will be coming your way as well this week. So take care, Anne.
There's more, is there? More?
Yeah,
coming?
there's more.
Oh, okay, right.
All right, Anne. Take care.
Bye. I'm glad to see you better this week.
Yeah, I feel much better. The nasal sound's gone. Yeah, I'm speaking normally. Thank God.
Oh, okay then. Bye then.
Bye.
Bye. Oh, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm trying to...
Oh God, she wasn't as dippy this week, was she?
You're still recording, Carl.
Oh God. Oh yeah, that's fine. Okay, well, very good discussion. If anyone wants to come in on that, this is my channel sometime along the line. And thank you very much, Jessica. And we'll stop the recording now. Any comments on what Jessica said? Put this at the end, and we'll try and get them over to Jessica. But if you, but I might use them myself and take the dissertation idea. Good idea. And not give anyone any credit, including Jessica. That's fine. Anyway, thank you very much, and we'll stop.